Hey guys, what's going on? So I woke up a little early this morning and I decided to be a little bit productive. Specifically, I was focusing entirely on developing the Greeblies as well as some of the really cool equipment that I'll be using on my Mandalorian armor. So I very nonchalantly got on my computer system, downloaded a couple files with some thermal detonators, impact grenades, and some little canister assemblies, and decided to 3D print them.
So tasty!
So without further ado, we're just going to cut right into this episode. This is a really cool one, so we're going to talk a lot about the grenades and all those special little pieces that are going to be kind of mounted to the belt in this specific episode. So stay tuned, guys. I'm going to shut up and we're going to get right into the action. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the belt system. So the important thing to know here is that the belt is going to have to hold a lot of different things. First and foremost, I'm going to need some sort of bandolier structure to be able to basically hoist the rifle on my back so I can walk around without having to worry about tiring my arms out. And I'm going to have holsters on the side to be able to hold these pistols right here that I made a while ago. So I just need to do some little touch-up work on these. They're a little ugly in my opinion, but they're not bad. They're okay. So I'm going to have to holster these bad boys. And additionally, I'm going to have to find a spot for this little guy. So if you ever looked at a stormtrooper before, they typically have a little Bacta tank that sits kind of right above their rear end. So I'm going to try to recreate that with this guy. So having some sort of strap system to go over this to kind of sit on the belt would be nice. And then I 3D printed a bunch of these little dudes here just a couple minutes ago. And these here are little ammo canisters or canisters of some sort that I'm going to have kind of sitting up on the bandolier, as well as maybe having a few on the belt itself just to kind of add some additional greeblies and aesthetics to the costume. And additionally, I also recently 3D printed a thermal detonator, which is this guy right here. So let me see if I can put that in there. So we have this thermal detonator here. And this guy will basically just come together like this. And there's this little switch here that'll slide up and down. And what I was thinking about doing was putting a little LED light inside of here. And maybe some lights or something else in here. So anytime I switch this little guy up here, it'll start blinking just to kind of create a little bit more realism with this. And plus, it might be hard to tell on the camera, but there's a lot of layering that you can see from the 3D print. So I'm going to have to probably use some acetone curing to clean that up and maybe some sanding, but I'm going to have to find a way to mount that on the belt. And last, and most certainly not least, is my impact grenade, which is another fun little weapon from Battlefront, which is all of this. As you can see, it's a lot of just random parts. Got these little nuts here, as you can see, which kind of make up the exterior shell. I've got this kind of main middle sort of chassis with these rings. I've got these little standoffs here, which basically hold together these little nuts on each one of these little holes here on this little channel right here. And then you got these top and bottom pieces, which basically sandwich the main body together. And that kind of makes up most of the body for the impact grenade. So this is going to be a little bit more of an assembly process, but that should be a pretty cool little bonus to put there. And what I'll probably end up doing is with the thermal detonator, the impact grenade, as well as all of these little ammo canisters, I was going to use probably rub and buff just to kind of get that metallic shine in there to kind of give it a realistic look. And also have to go over it with some acetone curing and some light sanding just to make sure everything works. But the bottom line is I have to take all of this hardware and I have to figure out a way of getting it mounted across my waist.
You fool!
let's talk a little bit about the bandolier. So this right here is a poster board cutout of the bandolier. Basically, it's just gonna kind of come over me like this in a sense. And that's basically how this is gonna work. And then these little straps down here will have a little loop that interfaces with the belt. And what you're noticing here is what's gonna happen is I'm basically gonna have another strap that's gonna come through this little channel here. And then these little marks here is where each one of these guys are gonna basically be sandwiched by the leather inside of. And then the belt will then loop back through here just to kind of create more connection with the bandolier. And there'll be this extra strap that hangs off here with a belt buckle. And that belt buckle will then be the piece that interfaces with the rifle. So if I'm walking around, let's say, and I want to take off my gun to use it for a pose or for whatever, I can just basically click that belt buckle and then just grab the rifle and pull it out. If I want to put it back, just put the rifle over my shoulder and click in the belt buckle, and it's nice and secured. It's not going anywhere. And that's basically the bandolier pattern that I'm going to be using. And then, of course, you're going to have the belt pattern, which really nothing to show here, but it's just long strips of leather. And there's actually two pieces, one that'll be sewn on top of the other. I'm still trying to figure out kind of what to do with all of my leather pieces for the belts, but I have kind of an idea. I'm going to try to use a very similar type of style that the Mandalorian uses, but try to be a little bit more susceptible to these items. So just trying to customize the different pieces to be able to satisfy that function. And now you may be asking, well, what kind of leather you're going to be using? Well, I have had this leather for a while now. This is just some 8-ounce leather that I got Tandy Leather a couple of years ago that I was going to use for Rivali cosplay. This is just one of many pieces that I have sitting around. I just never got around to finishing that cosplay. Hopefully soon I will get back into it once I actually get this finished and a couple other projects. I'll move into Rivali, but nonetheless, I'll be using this material to make the belt and the bandolier. It's got a little bit of weight to it, but it's really structurally sound, and it's got some good grip to it too. And I've already done some test pieces of dyeing and actually using it for some belts on Rivali, and it just looks really good. It has a lot of depth in it, so it just gives a really good look to it. So I'm gonna have to cut into this leather, which isn't cheap. This stuff is definitely expensive, so I'm gonna have to do a lot of practice runs before I get that finished. So let's go ahead and let's just go ahead and swap over. I'm gonna go ahead and take these items. I'm gonna start assembling them together, kind of cleaning them up, getting them looking really good. And then following that, I'll go ahead and switch over to the patterns I've made and start actually cutting some leather, trying to size up the leather, and figuring out just how I'm gonna mount all this madness to my waist. So let's take a little bit of a breather here real fast and just talk a little bit about what's going on. So I just got finished printing and painting the little details for the impact grenade, the thermal detonator, and these little canisters with this filler primer paint right here that I got at my local Home Depot. And what's nice about this stuff is it's not your typical spray paint. As a matter of fact, the way this stuff works is that it's so thick that whenever you make a 3D print and you see all those ridges there, it actually fills up the gaps between those ridges, so it gives you a nice kind of clean surface to sand off of. And you get something kind of like this. It might be hard to see in the camera, but what I'll show you guys in a little bit later is basically once you kind of get that filler in there, you can just go ahead and sand it down all the way up to 180 grit, and it gives you a really nice, smooth, and pretty smooth surface to work off of. So I just finished that with these canisters here. I'm going to repeat the sanding process for all these guys right here. I mean, they look pretty smooth right now, but I just want to kind of go over it with some sandpaper just to kind of give it a little bit more of a uniform surface. Do the same thing over here with this guy because there's a little bit of ridges still here and there that I can probably sand out. And once I get that finished, I'm then going to use this stuff right here. This is the magical stuff. If you're trying to make anything look metallic, this is literally going to make anything look metallic. This is Rub and Buff, and you can get this pretty much at any crafting store. I got this at my local Michael's. And basically what you do is you take a little dab, you only need like a small pinch of it, and you put it on the surface of whatever material you're looking at, and you just rub it in there, and you keep rubbing until you feel a little bit of friction heat coming off of your finger, because you're basically burning in this wax into the material, and it gives it a really nice, smooth, metallic finish. And it's a really good and cheap way of making metallic objects look metallic without having to go through all the trouble of making metal parts. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is I'm going to go ahead and do some sanding work on all these parts here, and then go ahead and go over it with Rub and Buff, and that should give us pretty close to the final product. Once we get all this done, we'll go ahead and switch over to black washing, but I'm going to do that all with the armor and everything kind of in one big go, just to make it easier. So let's go ahead and do that real fast. All right, everybody, so that's all I have for today. I hope you all enjoyed this. I know it was a little bit of a detachment from what I said in the previous episode, talking a little bit more about this guy right here. It's just that I had a lot more progress that was done on the belt than on this guy, the macrobinoculars. But real quick, just to satisfy you all, here's the helmet, and here are the macrobinoculars. So as you can see, still got a lot to do on them. Like this guy just came out, but basically it sits right here, and this piece with magnets will come in, and it'll just kind of situate itself like that. And that's basically how this bad boy is going to work. So in a future episode, hopefully sooner rather than later, I'll talk a little bit more about the processing for this. But in the meantime, I'll see you all in the next one, and you guys take care and have a safe one out there, all right? Happy May the 4th.